She stood up in the middle of the courtroom and raised her hand. Nobody noticed except one man, a former tomb guard sitting in the third row, silent, watching, trained to see what everyone else missed. To the jury, it was just another fraud trial. To the judge, just another rich defendant fighting for his name. But when that little girl moved her hand, a single motion, small and quick, the entire case turned upside down. Because what no one knew, not the attorneys, not the reporters, not even the bailiff standing 2 feet away, was that she had just given the international distress signal. And the only person who saw it was a man who once spent 10 years guarding the most sacred silence in America. Before we dive into this story, where are you watching from? Let us know in the comments. And if you believe that values like honor, courage, and sacrifice still matter, join us in keeping their legacy alive. The courtroom was silent. You could almost hear the tension in the air, thick and heavy like the moment before a storm. Third row, left side, a man in a dark gray jacket sat perfectly still, his back straight, his hands resting lightly on his knees. To anyone else, he looked calm, but his name was Evan Blackwood, a 32-year-old former tomb guard with the old guard at Arlington. And inside, every instinct he had was on high alert. At the defense table sat Richard Kane, sharp suit, perfect tie, polished cufflinks that caught the overhead lights each time he gestured. The kind of man who built his entire life on appearances and winning. Next to him, in a small wooden chair, almost too big for her, sat an 8-year-old girl in a navy blue cardigan buttoned to the very top. Her name was Clara. She stared down at the polished courtroom floor, her hands folded neatly in her lap, motionless. Then it happened. A tiny movement, so subtle most people would have missed it. But Evan didn't. He couldn't. He was trained not to. Clara brushed a strand of hair behind her ear. Her small hand closed into a fist. Slowly, deliberately, she opened it again, then pressed the fist into her open palm. It lasted less than a second. To anyone else, just an innocent gesture. To Evan Blackwood, it was something else entirely. The international distress signal. A silent cry for help used by hostages, domestic abuse victims, and children who can't speak out loud. Evan's chest tightened. He leaned forward, every muscle coiled. He waited. Seconds stretched, and then she did it again. Slower, clearer, her eyes still down. That's when he stood, calm, measured. His voice carried across the courtroom, steady but impossible to ignore. "Your Honor," he said, pointing toward the defense table, "that child just gave a distress signal twice. She is asking for help." The entire courtroom froze. And in that moment, everything changed. To understand why Evan Blackwood stood up in that courtroom, you need to know who he is. For 10 years, Evan served in the 3rd U.S. Infantry Regiment, better known as the Old Guard. He spent most of that time posted at the Tomb of the Unknown Soldier in Arlington National Cemetery. That job changes a man. Every day for hours at a time, Evan marched in perfect silence. 37 steps forward, pause, 37 steps back. His entire life became precision, his uniform flawless, his movements exact, his mind trained to notice everything without reacting to anything. He stood watch in summer heat, in winter storms, through lightning and blizzards. He had faced tourists, protesters, even threats, and his expression never cracked. Years of discipline taught him something rare, how to read a room without letting the room read him. When he left the Army, Evan tried to build a quiet life in Virginia, a small apartment, a steady job at a security firm, but the habit stayed, scanning exits, observing patterns, noticing the one detail everyone else missed. That morning, Evan had no reason to be in a courtroom at all. It was Detective Mallory Ross who called him, an old friend from a security training drill years ago. Mallory worked for Child Protective Services now. She had said only one thing on the phone. "Evan, I need your eyes on something. There's a custody element buried in a financial case, and I've got a bad feeling about it." He didn't ask questions. If Mallory called, he showed up. And that's how he found himself in courtroom 3, on the third floor of a federal courthouse in Arlington, watching a wealthy businessman on trial for financial fraud. The defendant's name was Richard Kane, 45, smooth-talking, charming, the kind of man who always looked like he was winning even when he was losing. Beside him sat his wife, Diane, elegant and composed, her pearl necklace catching the light whenever she leaned forward. And next to her sat the little girl, Clara. At first glance, Clara looked perfect. Navy cardigan, neatly combed hair, hands folded in her lap. To everyone else, she looked like a well-behaved child sitting through a boring hearing. But Evan knew better. Her stillness wasn't discipline. It was something else, something wrong. And when he saw that silent signal, twice in less than a minute, he knew Mallory had been right. Something terrible was hiding in plain sight. Evan had been trained to scan crowds, to pick up details others missed. That instinct, sharpened by a decade of guarding the tomb, was now locked on Clara. She sat beside Diane Kane, her stepmother, small and silent, dwarfed by the heavy oak chair. Her navy cardigan was buttoned to the very top, despite the courtroom's warm air. Her hands rested neatly on her knees, unmoving. Her shoulders were stiff, pulled tight like wires straining under pressure. Diane leaned toward her occasionally, her hand resting lightly on her shoulder. To anyone else, it looked protective. To Evan, it was containment, a hand placed just firmly enough to remind a child she had no choice but to sit still. Across the room, Richard Kane was giving testimony, his voice smooth and commanding. He spoke about finances, reputation, and family values, pausing at just the right moments to smile at the jury. But Evan wasn't listening to his words. He was watching Clara. Every time Richard spoke, Clara shrank slightly in her chair. Her knees pressed closer together, her chin dipped lower, her shoulders curled inward just a fraction more. Then came the first signal. Clara lifted one hand as if brushing a strand of hair behind her ear. Her small fist closed, then it opened, pressed into her open palm. Smooth, subtle, deliberate. Evan froze. The international distress signal. He had learned it years ago during a joint security seminar, a universal sign for silent help used in shelters, embassies, and military briefings. It meant only one thing: I can't speak, but I need help. Evan leaned forward slightly, testing his instincts, waiting. Maybe it was coincidence. Maybe he imagined it. But then, 30 seconds later, Clara did it again, slower this time, clearer. It wasn't coincidence, Evan whispered under his breath, barely audible. She's asking for help. From the back of the courtroom, Detective Mallory Ross had been watching him. She moved closer and crouched beside his chair, speaking quietly. Mallory whispered, "You see something, don't you?" Evan nodded once, his voice low and measured. Evan said, "She gave the signal twice." Mallory glanced at Clara, then back at Evan, her jaw tightening. Mallory whispered, "Are you sure?" Evan's reply was steady, his voice almost flat. Evan said, "I'm never more sure of anything." He sat back, silent again, but his focus had narrowed to one thing: Clara Kane. Whatever happened next, Evan knew he couldn't ignore it, and the moment to act was coming fast. The courtroom was quiet, except for the sound of Richard Kane's voice. Smooth, confident, calculated. He leaned back in the witness chair, hands folded neatly, his tone polished like a salesman who never lost a deal. The jury hung on his every word, but Evan wasn't listening. His focus stayed locked on Clara. She hadn't moved in nearly 10 minutes. Her small hands remained folded, her shoulders stiff, but her breathing, shallow, quick, uneven, told a different story. Evan could see the tension ripple beneath her stillness. a silent storm trapped inside an 8-year-old body. Then Richard shifted slightly, resting his hand on the back of Clara's chair. At first, it looked casual, harmless, but Evan saw the way Clara froze at his touch, her spine tightening like a wire pulled taut. That was it. Evan rose from his seat, slowly, deliberately, the way a soldier rises when called to post. His voice, calm but commanding, carried across the courtroom. Evan said, "Your Honor, I need to address the court." Judge Green looked up, startled by the interruption. Judge Green said, "Sir, you are not authorized to speak. Sit down immediately." Evan didn't move. Evan said louder this time, "That child just gave the international distress signal.